Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And this morning we are going to be joined by Harley Schlanger in just a few moments. But Harley has to finish up a very important phone call, and we are certainly glad that he's going to fit us in after doing his business this morning. I thought I'd just jump on by myself here for a few minutes. He should be with us in 5 minutes or so. Um, so much is going on so fast. It's amazing. I think President Trump keeps sounding like President McKinley, doesn't he? He keeps wanting to make America great again in the sense of no income tax. Wouldn't that be lovely? No income tax sounds a whole lot better than that you will own nothing and be happy. If I had no income tax, I'd own plenty of stuff and I'd be a lot happier. Um, it reminds me of Michael Hudson, the economist who we've spoken of from time to time here at McDuff Lives. And I did one or two shows on him if you want to look in my archive on McDuff's Minefields on my Rumble or BitChute archive. And BitChute is called McDuff Uncensored, which is where all my uncensored stuff is, as well as everything else. So anyway, Michael Hudson, a economist who has been around a long time, was with the Hudson Institute, but I don't think he's a direct Hudson, as in Hudson's Bay. Maybe they're all related somehow, but I think he is quite a thinker. He's written a number of books, and one of them about a jubilee and how we need to have a jubilee. And I was thinking how nice that is that Harley Schlanger and I were talking about having a jubilee last session 2 weeks ago. And doesn't Trump didn't come out and say, well, what wouldn't we be better if we had excise taxes instead of income taxes? But that's just the beginning of the discussion, because as Michael Hudson pointed out, if you were to tax internet transactions at like 0.01 cent per transaction, you could pay for the federal government. And that simple solution, which I think makes the most sense of anything I've ever heard of, doesn't get talked about in the halls of Congress or the administration. But it'd be even better if we were to go back to the constitutional interpretation of Congress's power, because I don't think that the Congress really ever had the power to impose an income tax on us. And I've spoken about income in the past, about how is it that individuals, when they do spend their life's energy working, uh, aren't spending as much as they get in. So that why should you be taxed because you got a certain amount of money in trade for a certain amount of labor that you used up your energy to provide? And that's pretty simplistic, but over the course of studying the Constitution and American law, I don't find any basis for an income tax at a federal level. It's got to be unconstitutional, and it's how they pay for all the wars and how they get us to pay for them to make more money by taking resources from other people. So yeah, I'd love to have a major tax revolt if we can't get Congress to do what they should do. I've also been thinking about Gaza a lot, and President Trump's proposal that the Palestinians be shipped off to somewhere else, Egypt, I guess, or somewhere else where they can um, be resettled. And I think it's horrible. I think taking people away from their homeland and their community is horrible. And I think the fact that so many, apparently hundreds of thousands of people from northern Gaza, even though the whole area has been reduced to a dusty concrete powder, still going back. That's where they came from. That's their home, and they're going to go back and hopefully rebuild if peace prevails long enough. It's troubling to me that President Trump would want to accommodate uh, the genocidal policies of President Netanyahu. But what's more troubling to me is the fact that we had a Democratic administration for 4 years that allowed this to happen, that did not say stop, and in fact gave it cover by um, pronouncing themselves to be Zionists. President Biden was a proud Zionist. Congress put Israeli flags in front of their offices, as our friends with Code Pink, when they would go down to try to protest the genocide, that they would have to go past an Israeli flag in front of one of our U.S. Congress representatives' offices. And where does that come from but fear and campaign contributions and AIPAC and all of this lobbying that has converted Congress into a institution that serves a foreign country's needs more than the people of this country, in my opinion. So there's good and there's bad, in my opinion. I was talking with my wife a little while ago about the order to stop allowing trans people into opposite facilities, I guess in the military and otherwise. I don't know the complete details, but it's a hot topic for a lot of President Trump's supporters. There's a lot of fear of if you allow biological males into the girls' room, that they would take advantage. I don't know if there's any evidence of that, but there certainly is a lot of fear. At any rate, President Trump has stated policy, and that is what the military and all the federal institutions, and I think a lot of private institutions, will adopt that as policy as well. It's um, it's amazing the amount of change that's happening within the first 2 weeks. And other presidents have promised to do a lot of things. I remember President Obama was going to do so many things in his first 100 days, and he didn't do them. And the excuse is, well, once I got into office, it just became impossible. I learned things that I didn't know before. But President Trump hasn't offered any excuses like that, at least not so far. But what I want to talk to Harley about is the stock market and this crazy deep seek thing that is an AI program that comes from China, and suddenly it's got more investors than 4 or 5 times as many investors as the competing AI companies got, and that's crashing Nvidia and the Nasdaq. Whereas the Dow seems to be doing fine. It is simple enough to assume that people got spooked by DeepSeek, didn't want to invest in that, but said, well, I'm pulling my money out of open the GPI or the I can't remember the acronyms, but you know what I mean, the major AI companies. And where'd they put it? Well, they put it back into the Dow, the blue chips. So the stock market right now looks to be as high as it's ever been in terms of actual dollar value. Whether it has any real value, I don't know. But as long as the dollar is king, the stock market is doing just fine. All right, hang on a minute. I'm going to get a sip of tea. Now that I got a mute button, I have to remember to unmute when I do it. A mute button was the first big addition we had here at McDuff Studio here on Mystery Island, and it's a great thing to have a mute button, but you have to remember to do it, and then you have to remember to undo it. My Operation Gladio book readings are the book by Williams, by Paul Williams, and you can find them on my archives at McDuff Uncensored. They might even be on a playlist there. I'm not sure, but that's the book that I chose to read, and 90% of it I think I did read, along with comments along the way. So Operation Gladio, a huge thing to know about, and did it ever end? I don't think so. Another book that I want always to promote is How the Nation Was Won by H. Graham Lowry. I read 27 chapters, excerpts of that. Let's see if I have it right in front of me. I thought I did. But anyway, you can get that on my archives as well. McDuff Uncensored on BitChute, and the Rumble archives, I believe, also has it. Well, here comes Harley. And here's Harley Schlanger to join us for another 45 minutes. Harley, thanks for joining us today once again, and hope your phone call went well.
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I've just been doing one interview after another because we have these hearings coming up toward the end of the week. And we're very much involved in mobilizing to make sure that Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel are confirmed. So I've been on 3 different states where there are Republican senators who are a little bit wavering. And so we got friendly talk show hosts to stir up the population to go after them. So, and actually, anyone in your audience, I'll give out a number that they can call if they want to know, if they want some information on what they can do. They can call this number and leave their email address, and we'll send it to them. So if you don't mind, I'll give this number out because this is a crucial mobilization, and we only have a couple of days left.
Sure. Who are they gonna call?
This will be an Executive Intelligence Review office because EIR did the Liars Bureau report. Did you get a chance to see that?
I did. Yes, excellent. And that's something that folks can see. It's on YouTube. I think it's on your Facebook page as well. Anyway, the Liars. What was it called?
Liars Bureau. Liars
Bureau. That's right. Yeah. And so these Republicans, just rattle off a few names who we need to get in touch with.
Well, the most important is John Curtis, who's the junior senator from Utah, who's a former congressman. He's just a little wavering. The other one, Joni Ernst of Iowa, who was wavering on the Hegseth nomination. She seems to be still wavering a little bit also. So Joni Ernst in Iowa. And who is the third? I'll get it before we get off the program. But the number you can call, and this is just a tape machine. They're going to ask you for your email address and or phone number, so we can get back to you and get you a copy. If you leave an email address, we'll send you a copy, or you can get the copy just from the LaRouche Organization website. But the number is 703-777-4494. So it's 703-777-4494. And, hopefully you'll be able to get in touch with us and get involved in the mobilization, because the hearings are going to be Thursday and Friday. And what's interesting is that in the Gabbard case, her opponents include, on the one side, Hillary Clinton and AOC, and on the other side, John Bolton and John Brennan. So you have a merger of the left and right war hawks. And the fact that they're all targeting Tulsi Gabbard is an indication of why she should be supported.
So she is under fire from the uniparty then, if
Yeah,
we talk in those terms.
precisely.
And what I keep hoping is that one day the people who consider themselves progressives or leftists will realize that the people that consider themselves to be populists or conservatives 95% agree on everything, and the rest, the other 5%, is where they divide and conquer and use us for their schemes
Yeah.
and cannon fodder and taxes and everything else. Speaking of taxes, did you see Trump said, well, maybe we could just go back to using import taxes and excise taxes and forget about income tax. Who needs it? Uh, William McKinley Redux. Um, you and I were talking about a Jubilee year last time,
That's
Harley.
right.
Remember? Well, that would make everybody just absolutely ecstatic with.
Jubilant.
And will we not be rushing out to spend that money and make things and build things and go places and do things that they used to call churn in the economy, to just make things rolling again? And anyway, what do you think? Is there any chance of that in your crystal ball?
I don't think so, but I think he's throwing out all kinds of things,
Yeah.
from Canada becoming the 51st state to the US taking over Greenland. There are a lot of things that he's throwing out there. And some of it is, look, he's legitimately the disruptor in chief. And he's obviously got his enemies scrambling to try and stay ahead of him. But I think there are a couple of areas he has to concentrate on and not take his eyes off them for a minute. One is the Ukraine war. And it's been back and forth on this Putin question, where on the one side, he's putting out the story that comes from essentially NATO, that Russia is essentially not winning the war, that they've lost lots of people, more than the Ukrainians. This is just nonsense. It's coming from the military faction that's committed to the destruction of Russia. And he's got to know the difference between those people and people like Colonel McGregor, who used to work for him. Remember that McGregor was the assistant to Miller, who was his last defense secretary. So, and McGregor's clear on this. Scott Ritter's clear on it. Some of the other people who are on the blogosphere now, Jeffrey Sachs, they're people who know something, who are putting out the truth of what's going on there. The other area where he's got some problems is Gaza. This proposal for the United States to participate in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine is atrocious, and I think he's just got to rethink it. First of all, the Egyptians will never accept 1.5 million Palestinians, especially from Gaza, because they'll know that many of them will have been allies of Hamas, and Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. And you may remember the Muslim Brotherhood was part of the Arab Spring that was involved in getting rid of Mubarak and taking over Egypt for a brief period of time. So the Egyptians are not going to go along with that. I don't think the Saudis will either.
Well, but that's the issue of the moment is that can Trump twist their arms enough to make them go along with it? It sounds like he thinks he can. He's talking like the godfather of the world, and look what he did with Colombia. He just kind of said, "Okay, fine, 50% tariff," and then Colombia is back. Oh no, we were just kidding. We're going along with it. We'll do what you say. So they're going to take the immigrants. I mean, the returned immigrants, and
Yeah.
and like it, right?
Well, it's, Trump's view is what Witkoff, his envoy to Netanyahu, who pushed through the ceasefire, it was a classic case of making an offer that they couldn't refuse. And no one knows for sure what that offer was. Some people suspect it was what we're seeing now, that Trump will clean up, get rid of Gaza, get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza, let the Israelis uh, annex more of the West Bank. From what I can tell from the sources that we have, no such promises were made, although the Israelis were hoping they would be. On the other hand, shipping 2,000-pound bombs to Israel after all the damage that's been done, I'm not sure why he would want to follow through in the footsteps of Tony Blinken. So I think there are a lot of things that are in motion that aren't determined, that aren't fully worked out yet. But what our suggestion is, he's got to sit down with Putin and with Xi Jinping as soon as possible. These are two of the most savvy and credible leaders in the world, both of whom have been putting forward solutions and have a much broader strategic perspective than the idea of America first. And, it's not China first or Russia first. It's how do we get together? How do we have mutual benefit from collaboration on economic development? Now, the reason I think that'll work is that Trump essentially is a builder. He likes the idea of getting in and building things. Now, the question is building resorts on Gaza what he should be looking toward? Or would it be better to build a viable state for the Palestinian people? And he's interested in his legacy, how he's known in history. That's one of the reasons he keeps saying he wants to make sure that we don't get into any more wars. He wants to be known not as one of the war presidents, but one of the peace presidents. But he's got to really get concentrated on who are the people that can work with him to do that. And the other problem, John, that exists still very profoundly is the Democrats are going to try and sabotage anything that he proposes, and he doesn't have full support of the Republicans. And this has a lot to do with the way the intelligence community blackmails senators and congressmen, the way that either they blackmail them with dirty stuff they've done, or they, let's just say, incentivize them to stick with the deep state by offering them jobs after they get out of the House or Senate. So there's a lot of corruption that he's got to clean up and deal with. That's why he needs someone like Patel at the FBI, someone who's not going to tolerate the kind of behavior that we saw from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and McCabe and James Comey.
Tell me about Patel. I haven't studied him. Where does his power come from?
Well, his power comes from the fact that he was, besides Matt Gaetz, the most vigorous fighter in trying to expose the Russiagate story. Patel was on the staff of Devin Nunes, the congressman from California. And Nunes was on the House Intelligence Committee, and he was the one who did the investigation, for example, the corruption of the FISA court, where the FBI literally sent in false affidavits, fake affidavits, lies, to try to get the FISA court to authorize wiretaps against the Trump campaign, which they did. And Nunes, through Patel's work, was the first person who came up with that, and he wrote a memo on it, which was censored. They tried to keep the memo from getting out into the public. What it showed is what we now know, that people like Peter Strzok and McCabe and James Baker, the chief counsel for the FBI, were involved in censorship, were involved in dishonest reporting, disinformation, and so on, including clearing the way for wiretaps on a presidential candidate. Now, they did this in conjunction with the Hillary Clinton campaign. So you had the Obama Justice Department, the Obama Law Enforcement Agency, the FBI, working with Hillary Clinton's campaign to slander Trump as someone who is being put into office by the Russians, by Putin. And all of the Steele dossier, for example, which was circulated fairly widely, was a product of British intelligence working through networks of a couple of US law firms and working with the Clinton campaign, Podesta and others. So all of this is known in general. The person who found out a lot of it, or who was on top of it, was Kash Patel. And he was very clear in his reporting on it. Trump greatly appreciated it. And then he wrote a book on I think he called it something like the criminal organizations in Washington. And he put a list of 60 some people who needed to be investigated for their corruption. For example, Mike Morell, former deputy assistant director of the CIA, acting director of the CIA for a brief period of time. Morell was the one who drafted the Hunter Biden laptop letter and organized 51 former intelligence officers to sign it. Now, why did he do that? He was asked to do it by Biden's, one of the key operatives of the Biden campaign, namely Tony Blinken. So Blinken went to Morell and said, don't you think something should be done about this Biden laptop? It looks to all of us as though this is Russian disinformation. So they wrote this letter to counter the report that was coming out in the New York Post and shut down the discussion of what was in the Hunter Biden laptop. And now we know that it was true what was in there. It was not Russian disinformation. It was bad judgment by a crackhead. And it was protected by top people in the intelligence community who are the same people today who are saying you can't trust Tulsi Gabbard because she doesn't have experience. She's a Putin puppet. She's an Assad puppet. And so that's what we put together in our Liars Bureau report. It's a compact 14-page dossier, which takes 6 case studies and shows how the people who are involved in false flags and corruption and lies and censorship, FISA court corruption, these are the people who are leading the opposition to Tulsi Gabbard. And that's why I said earlier, you have on the one side Hillary Clinton, her buddy from Florida, Wasserman Schultz, AOC on the so-called left, working together with Bolton, Brennan, and others on the so-called right. And what do they all have in common? They're protecting the intelligence agencies from being investigated. Now, the best thing that's happened is that Trump did an executive order to declassify the files on the Kennedy assassination, the Robert Kennedy assassination, and the King assassination. Now, I'm relatively certain that there's not going to be something that will pop out from these new files that will solve the case. But the important thing is that by doing this, it's basically saying we're not going to allow this kind of classification in the future to cover up for crimes of people who are have some connection to the government. And that's what Gabbard represents. If she's confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, she has oversight of the 18 intelligence agencies under the US government. And it will be her job to make sure that these kinds of false flags or corruptions don't take place again. As opposed to if you have someone in there, who is like Clapper, who is part of the deep state, they're going to cover up. So that's why they're so panicked about the Gabbard nomination and the Patel nomination. But just to go back to Patel, because that was your question, if you've seen him at all, you see he's a scrapper, a fighter. And his personal commitment is to stop the lying and the corruption. And you would think, after all we've seen in the last 50 years, that would be a popular position. But no, people have too much to hide.
Well, let me insert one of my thoughts that I was working on. I did a show on it 2 months ago, or maybe 3 months ago now, on the legacy of NSC 10/2, the order, executive order signed by Harry Truman, uh, that forces the CIA and other secret ops to have plausible deniability built into their operations.
Yeah.
And it says, number two, that the government will basically lie to protect the plausible deniability of these special operations. And that, of course, was set up for Allen Dulles in the Truman administration, and used to justify all of the things they did in the Eisenhower administration. And then, of course, they run into President Kennedy, and things look like kind of bad for them until a lone gunman just happened to appear to take care of that problem for them. If we do ever uncover what happened on November 22nd, 1963, I think, we still have the problem of NSC 10/2. And all of these people can claim that they are simply following the law. The law is, I have to cover this up. If I don't cover it up, then I can get prosecuted.
But John, there were more recent laws. For example, the law that's against assassination. That you cannot, a U.S. government agency can't order an assassination, and that's part of the law also. But listen, there's something very fascinating which I hadn't realized until a couple of days ago. On what was it? It was yesterday. Was the 50th anniversary of the vote in the U.S. Senate to establish the Church Committee to investigate the abuses and the corruption that included the Pentagon Papers. It included COINTELPRO against opposition to the war and civil rights leaders. It included Army spying. There was a famous case in 1970 where an Army whistleblower came forward and said the Army is keeping secret records and files on Americans. Something called Operation, I have it here somewhere. Well, it was before Snowden. It was an agreement by the telecom companies to pass records over to the NSA rather. And so all these things, and then Watergate, all these things built up a sense that there's too much secret government, dirty operations going on. So by an 82-4 vote, 50 years ago in one day, both parties in the Senate voted to set up a special committee, and they put Frank Church, a senator from Idaho, in charge of it. And they dug in quite aggressively. But here's something I just got yesterday as I was looking into this from the National Security Archives. It's a report that was put out in 2015, which looked at documents involved in this. And it said White House efforts to blunt the 1975 Church Committee investigations into CIA abuses foreshadowed executive congressional battles after 9/11. And it said that advisors to Ford sought to protect the CIA's image abroad by having its capabilities, quote, cloaked in mystery and held in awe, unquote. But now listen to this next subhead. Ford administration's stratagem of withholding sensitive intelligence was spearheaded by Dick Cheney. So here in 1975, Cheney was an assistant to Rumsfeld, who was a special assistant to Ford. This is the same Dick Cheney who worked with Hillary Clinton against the Trump election campaign, and whose daughter was very much involved as a congressman in going after Trump. So over 50 years, you have this family linkage to protection of the deep state. And I thought this was really quite striking. And so Diane Sayre put out a statement yesterday, which basically said the Gabbard confirmation is an opportunity to get to the bottom of this, the networks involved in this, the corruption, and using the opening of the Kennedy and King assassinations as a springboard to having full transparency of government operations. And so, Diane put out a statement on this. It's up on the LaRouche Organization website, and we've been distributing it to every congressional office. In fact, tomorrow and Thursday, there'll be demonstrations in Washington outside the Congress demanding that the Senate confirm these two nominations. And if people are interested in that, again, you can call this number to find out where they'll be meeting and at what time, and you can join them. Apparently, there's going to be a bus or two from New York of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. supporters. So it's 703-777-4494. I hope people take advantage of that because, I was just on a program with an old friend from Utah who made the point that there are few moments in history where an individual's actions can make a difference. There's no one organizing a support for Gabbard or Patel except us. But that means that if someone joins that mobilization and makes a phone call and maybe organizes 2 or 3 or 4 other people to make phone calls, those will have an impact on the Senate offices that get the calls. And so it's an opportunity to have a say in what's happening with the fight back against this shadow government.
Well, I like the idea of believing in people, and I'd like to believe in Tulsi, and I'd like to believe in Kash Patel, but I need the evidence. I need to see it. So that let's give them an opportunity and see if they can deliver.
John, I sent you a tape that Jose Vega made. Did you look at that?
No.
It's a 6-minute tape about why Gabbard should be confirmed.
Oh, he put that up on X as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a really beautiful segment where there's on the one side of the screen, you see Jose Vega being dragged out after he intervened against AOC. And then it shows Gabbard defending explicitly what Vega did and saying, here's a young man who raised a question. What good is it going to do for us if we're all incinerated in nuclear war that you're supporting? And so she stepped out and openly defended Jose Vega's intervention against the war hawks in the Congress, her former colleagues. That told me something. And that's why Diane made the point that when you have Brennan and Bolton siding with Hillary Clinton and AOC on something, you ought to take a deeper look at what the issue is, what's involved in it.
I hope that people saw the horror of having Cheney come out in favor of Harris in the presidential race, and this is a reverberation from that same same issue. Somehow or another, enough Democrats got the message that they said, I can't really support this candidate. And if we can, so great. I'm happy to support that, and I think Jose Vega is a rising star. No matter what happens, he's just got such charisma and terrific. He's got a great voice. He's got presence, and I'm so glad to see him emerging as a leader
and as an inspiration for people because. Jose grew up in the South Bronx. He's part of a portion of the population that's taken for granted as having no future. And yet he's made it his own personal initiative to step in as an intervener, as someone who will speak the truth to power. And if necessary, he was willing to get dragged out for it. Same way Ray McGovern did when he did his confrontations a decade ago. Same way Max Blumenthal. Did you see Blumenthal confront Blinken?
No.
Here's Blumenthal at a Blinken's farewell press conference where, and,
Oh, I do remember.
well,
Yeah.
here's Blinken saying to the press, well, we appreciate your tough questions, and it's been the best part of my position here to talk with you, even though it sometimes is uncomfortable. So Max Blumenthal jumps up and says, why did you approve the killing of Palestinian children with these 2,000-pound bombs? Why did you cover for that? And then when he was interviewed afterwards, he was dragged out, of course. And when he was asked about, he brought up that Blinken is Jewish and Blumenthal is Jewish. How can someone who's Jewish tolerate Jews committing genocide? And he was asked by Judge Napolitano, why did you make it personal? He said, because it is personal. And you have to do that. You have to call these people to account. So that's what Jose does. That's what Lyndon LaRouche always did throughout his life. You know, some people say, how come you're supporting some things Trump does but opposing others? You know, when Lyndon LaRouche was brought into the Reagan administration as someone who was deployed to negotiate with the Soviets on the Strategic Defense Initiative, if he saw something coming out from the Reagan administration he didn't like, he nailed it. For example, the Garn St. Germain banking deregulation bill. He didn't give Reagan a pass, and we're not going to give Trump a pass. If Trump is going to side with the Israeli, Greater Israel Zionist extremists and give them a go-ahead to terrorize the Palestinian population in the West Bank, we can't possibly turn away from that or tolerate it. But that doesn't mean we're not going to support when he does something that's right. Somehow we've got to figure out a mechanism to reach him to make sure he's always right. But that's the nature of the political universe right now. It's very confusing for most people, deliberately so, because that's the whole point of the censorship, what I sometimes call the censorship industrial process.
Murkiness and murky
Yeah.
dark forces that we can't perceive, but somehow we know they are there, and that's what I think about when I think Trump supporting this removal of the indigenous people from from their homeland, taking them somewhere else, and we're going to sit back and watch and let that happen, and do it with our money because we're sending them billions of dollars. I can't understand how did the Democrats let it happen? I mean, the Democrats, they're as Zionist as a party as Trump, but the people that vote for him, I think most liberal Jews have like just said, oh well, too bad about Gaza, but Hamas is so bad that we have to do what we have to do.
Well, John, I was struck by something. I was watching the footage today of the Palestinians moving north
I
in
saw that.
these large numbers, 20, 25 in width, uh, several mile-long columns. And you know what it reminded me of? In the movie on Fiddler on the Roof,
Oh,
when the Jews were kicked out of Anatevka and they loaded up their wagons, they put all their personal possessions on their shoulders and had to march out after the pogrom went through. This is something that ought to strike the conscience of any self-respecting Jew. And I think in Israel, we're going to see eventually a backlash on this. And we see it among younger Jewish Americans who took to the campuses last spring to protest. And look what was done to them. You had Stefanik, who's now the UN ambassador, who intimidated university presidents who refused to crack down on the student protesters. You had the Congress pass something, the House, it didn't go through the Senate, that said if you're opposed to Israel, you're anti-Semitic.
hmm.
Well, that's giving the Israelis a blank check to do whatever they want to do. That's not the meaning of never again. And today is, I think, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And people should reflect on this. What does this mean? when you say never again will we tolerate hatred against people because of their ethnicity or their religion, and yet it's happening, and not just in Gaza. You see it in Sudan. You see it in Myanmar. You see these kinds of things happening in real time in front of our eyes, and this is where the moral clarity is necessary. And people like Jose Vega, who will stand up and challenge people who are doing this, are the real heroes of our time.
Bobby Kennedy, Make America Healthy Again. You mentioned Frank Church, and whenever I think of Frank Church, I think of what a hero he was. But then cancer takes him down, and that gives me chills because of my dad's story, in which
That
he
hits
was,
the personal side for you, doesn't it?
yeah, he was doing his heroic things that I'm still investigating, and I'm hoping we will get some answers under the new administration as to what really went on in his office in SACSA in the Joint Chiefs of Staff office. But the whole idea of cancercide is a real thing. And I hope that Bobby Kennedy will get to the root of uh, this horrible epidemic of cancer, chronic diseases, Lyme disease, and the association with uh, long ago biological warfare, as well as biological warfare that's going on right now. That's another big murky thing that people tend to not want to open the door and look at because it's so scary. But I have been facing it on my show now for the past 6 years, and I think the facts are there. It just takes some courage to open that door and to say, here's what really went on in the biological warfare between the Soviets and us, between Britain and them, between Germany and the U.S., going back to the 19th century when they were attacking each other's horses with glanders. These these things have been hidden under a deep, deep, deep cloak, and I think hopefully Bobby Kennedy, if nobody, if he doesn't do it, nobody's going to do it. At least not in my lifetime. So anyway, I hope that he gets his appointment, and I hope that he follows through with all of the horrible, horrible biological warfare that we need to talk about.
Well, he's also under attack by the same network. And instead of allowing him to investigate, and he's done a lot of research, but what would need to be done would be a real crash program to investigate some of these charges, which many doctors say are legitimate. Instead, what do they call him? They call him an anti-vaxxer. They make up these new terms and categories of people who are supposedly outside the mainstream, and therefore you can't trust them. And, the progress in history has come from people who haven't gone along with the axiomatics that are accepted by most people. And essentially, what happens in history is that when you have a ruling force that has the power to control where the money goes, that people who are outliers, outsiders, are cut off. They're cut off from being able to speak to the general society. And what did they do to LaRouche? To silence him, they called him an anti-Semite, a Nazi, a communist, a fringe politician, a perennial candidate. They came up with all these terms to try and discredit him. And yet, when you look back over his career, you see that virtually every time there was a burst of attacks on him, he was saying something that was not only important, but absolutely proven to be right in history. And I'm just doing some research now on what he said about the fight against the International Monetary Fund in 1974 and 1975, when he produced something called the International Development Bank as a proposal. Everything he said about IMF policy has been borne out. This is the famous book, Economic Hitmen, sort of shows a slice of what LaRouche was talking about. And what did they do? They tried to marginalize him. Well, reality has a way of biting back. And my final point to you today, John, is I don't know if you watched what was going on at Davos when Trump went there to speak, but it was the classic case of Trump being the turd in the punch bowl. He showed up. They'd been talking for 3 days about the importance of the Green New Deal, sticking with the Ukraine war, the importance of the European Union policy. And then Trump comes there and says, oh, look, this green policy, it's inept. Look what it's done to Germany. This war, horrible. It's got to end. And you could see these, what someone once called the Davos man, the guy who believes that borders are no good and that there should be free motion between whatever states anywhere. The Davos man, so sophisticated. Well, of course, they're mostly billionaires, and they're meeting there in the comfort of this setting in the majestic Alps, the snow-covered Alps, as though they are the masters of the universe. And then Trump shows up and says, you guys are idiots. You've wrecked Europe. You've wrecked Germany. So, I think we're at a moment of change. Reality is hitting. It just hit yesterday with this Chinese artificial intelligence operation that completely shattered this proposal that came forward from the proponents of artificial intelligence in the United States for this whatever it is, what is it called, Stargate?
Stargate, yeah.
Yeah. $500 billion project, and the Chinese, for about 1/10 of that cost, have surpassed it already. And what can you say then? Maybe everything we're being told about China is not true. Maybe they do have a scientific and engineering community that can do things because they're committed as a nation to general welfare, whereas we're committed to monetarist profits. So it's a fascinating moment to be alive, and people like you keep digging. Eventually we'll get somewhere.
Well, I'm going to keep digging, and I know you guys are digging away. The economy, it's just, my jaw drops when I think, what a 30 trillion something in national debt, but everybody just keeps on going and buying stock. And as far as everything looks on paper, in the United States, everything's okay as long as we go along with the horrible foreign policy that we've been doing. And so it's really, it's like I'm content with my life. I have enough of what I need. I'm comfortable and basically a happy person here as a citizen of the United States. But on the other hand, when I know what's going on abroad, I know what's going on with the rat lines and the horrible trafficking that goes on with drugs and humans and everything else.
Yeah.
The fact that our country has not been addressing this as the good guys should be doing means that we're not the good guys anymore. Like if President Trump can revive the President Kennedy's spirit of self-sacrifice for the good of others, what can you do for the country as opposed to what the country can do for you? If we could have a real change in our mentality as citizens and be happy again, that would be the crowning thing for my life. I would be so thrilled to think we got through it, we got past it, and we're back being Americans again.
Amen, brother.
All right, my friend. And we'll get together again in 2 weeks, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Okay.
Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you very much, and all the best to you. Bye-bye now.
Okay, John.
Bye, everybody. We will see you on Thursday, and have a great evening.